Alright, as promised, we're going to work on joints and movements today. So you're going to have a joint between any two bones, right? These joints can be immovable, which is called synarthros. Syn means same, and arthros means joint. And so with your immovable joints, it's saying that this acts like one bone, right? And then you have slightly movable or amphiarthros. Amphi, if you know anything that starts with the prefix amphi, like amphibian, it's between two worlds, right? It lives on the land and in the water. And so your amphiarthros joints are going to kind of be like synarthros joints, but they're also going to kind of be like diarthros joints or your free moving joints. Your diarthros joints, these are the joints that you typically think of. So these are all the joints, like your elbow joints, your knee joints, your shoulder joints. All those joints are diarthros joints. And so your amphiarthros are kind of in between not moving at all and freely moving. We can also group these by tissue types, and a lot of this overlaps. So your fibrous joints, these are going to be bones that are in close contact. There's no real movement in most of these, so most of your fibrous joints are going to be synarthros joints, like the sutures in the skull are synarthros and fibrous joints. Your cartilaginous joints, a lot of these are going to be amphiarthros, so they're either joined by hyaline cartilage or by fibrocartilage. And they're really good at absorbing shocks and taking pressures. They allow a little bit of movement. That's going to be like your intervertebral disc and your pubic symphysis. And then we get to our synovial joints or your diarthros joints. All your synovial joints are diarthrotic. All right, all of them have free movement. They all have a wide range of motion compared to amphiarthros and synarthros. But within that synovial joints, within these diarthros joints, there's a lot of range of motion between them. All right, these are associated mostly with your long bones. They are surrounded by a joint capsule and lined with the synovial membrane that makes synovial fluid. If you remember when we were talking about the membranes in the body, and you have your parietal pericardium and that visceral pericardium, and then there was a fluid in there, that serose fluid. Kind of the same idea with this synovial fluid. That synovial fluid helps to lubricate between these two bones. It also nourishes the chondrocytes, or the cells that make this articular cartilage between the two bones, so to keep that healthy. And it acts as a shock absorber. So it's kind of like having a water balloon between your two fists. As you push on those, it's going to absorb some of that shock. Associated with a lot of your synovial joints, you're going to see stuff like bursa, which are sacs that counter the friction that can happen in this structure. Sometimes you have a meniscus pad or menisci pads. Pads of cartilage and fat, especially in your knee, you have meniscus, and then of course lots of ligaments and tendons. Of our synovial joints, we have a few different types. You have your ball and socket. Your ball and socket joints, examples of these are going to be like your shoulder here and your hip. This gives us the largest range of motion of any of our synovial joints. Think about all the different ways you can move your shoulder. Up, down, forward, back. You can do circles with it. You can rotate with it. You can do those same movements with the hip, but it's a little bit less because this acetabulum and how deep this head sits within it kind of restricts some of that motion. So of all of our joints, your shoulder joints gives you the largest range of motion. The next one up is your condyloid joints. Your condyloid joints are going to be the joints between your metacarpals, or those bones that make your palm, and your phalanges, or the bones that make your finger. So it's always going to be between that proximal phalanx and metacarpal. If you look at it, it's kind of a little circle in a bowl. So here's that metacarpals, here's that first phalanx, and how it sits in there. And think of all the different ways you can move your finger. You can go up, down, left, right. You can draw circles with them. So you can move it in a bunch of different planes, but you can't rotate it. So you can't take that finger and twist it within the same axis. But you can do a lot of different other movements with it. Then we get to our gliding or your plane joints. These are going to be the joints that you find in your carpals and tarsals, so in your wrist and ankle bones. And if you look at them, they just kind of slide past each other ever so slightly. Not a lot of movement going on in these joints, just kind of sliding back and forth, maybe twisting a little bit within your wrist and your ankles. Then we get to our hinge joints. These are some of the joints that you know best, like your elbow joints and your knee joints. You only have movement in one plane, right? You can take your elbow and either flex it or extend it. You can bend it this way or straighten it out. Another place you find hinge joints is in your middle and distal phalanx, or in those phalanges. So where the metacarpal is, that's going to be a colloid or a condyloid, and then out here, these are going to be hinge joints. You can only bend those, right? You can't draw circles past that first joint. Then we get to pivot joints. So movement around a central axis. So the way that your radius and ulna hook up, you can move those. If you hold your elbow in your bicep in the same area, you can still take your hand and rotate it up and rotate it down. That is the radius and the ulna pivoting around each other. You also have a pivot joint between your atlas and your axis, so you can take your head and shake it to the left and to the right around a central axis. And then lastly, we have our saddle joint. That's going to be between metacarpal 1 and the trapezium. We talked about it just a little bit. And this one allows us to do this thing called opposition. Something that sets us apart from a lot of animals is having an opposable thumb, or a thumb that is capable of grasping. Grasping is a simple word for opposition. So as we've been talking about these, I've been kind of saying some of the movements that they do. We got a bunch of different types of movements: gliding, flexion, extension, hyperextension, abduction, adduction, circumduction, rotation. And we're going to be kind of running through these. So gliding, again, like the movements between the carpals and tarsals, it's pretty slight, but you can move your wrist in a bunch of different directions. Flexion, extension, and hyperextension. So flexion is going to decrease the angle between bones. So if you're flexing your biceps, you're taking your ulna and bringing it closer to your humerus. If you have it all the way out, that is 180 degrees, right? It's straight line. And as you bring it up, you can flex it to 90. You can flex it to a 45-degree angle, and that's decreasing that angle, so that's flexion. Extension is increasing that angle between the two bones. And then hyperextension is just going past the anatomical position. So you can hyperextend your neck just by looking up. So it doesn't always have to be like a painful hyperextension. When we normally talk about hyperextension, we're talking about like hyperextending your knee or something where it extends past that anatomical position, and that hurts. But you can hyperextend your head just by looking up, because that is extending past the anatomical position. We have adduction and abduction. So abduction is taking away from the midline of the body. Think of things that have been abducted, right? If you're going to abduct somebody, you're going to take them away, right? If you have been abducted by aliens, they have taken you away. Adduction is adding to the body, so coming towards the midline. So you can see this person abducting, going away, or adducting, coming towards the midline of the body. The next one is circumduction, drawing a circle. So if you can draw a circle with it, you can do circumduction. So you can do circumduction with the condyloid joints in your fingers. You can do circumduction with your ball and socket joints. Those are the two types of joints that can do circumduction. And circum just kind of means circle, right? If somebody is going to go around the globe, they're going to circumnavigate. The perimeter of a circle is its circumference, right? So circum means circle. Then we get rotation, moving around that central axis, like right here, rotating that head. You can also medially and laterally rotate your foot. You can also do pronation and supination, which is a type of rotation, but that's very specific for the way that the radius and the ulna slide past each other. And so supination is when you go from palm down to palm up. So like serving supper, you will be supinating. Pronation is where you go from supination to your palm down. So that's pronation. So supination, palm up, pronation, palm down. Inversion and eversion. Inversion is you take that sole of your foot and rotate it medially. So take it and point it towards the middle. You can invert your foot pretty easily. Eversion is a little bit harder. You kind of have an aversion to eversion. So taking that sole of your foot and rotating to the outside kind of hurts. And then we have dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Dorsi, talking about towards the back. If you take your toes and try to point them to your back. So rocking back on your heels is dorsiflexion. Plantar flexion is taking your toes and trying to plant them in the ground. So standing on your tippy toes is plantar flexion. If you want to do calf raises, you're doing plantar flexion. And then again, opposition, that grasping motion of your thumb, taking your thumb and touching it to your fingers is opposition. Protraction and retraction. If you're going to protract, you're going to put it out there. If you're going to retract, you're going to take it back so you can project your voice, right? You can send it out there. You can retract a statement because you said something you didn't mean to. So protraction out there, retraction, pulling it out, pulling it back. Elevation and depression. Elevation is lifting up. Depression is going down. So if you want to do shoulder shrugs like this guy, you're going to elevate and then you're going to depress. And that is all of those movements. We will be taking a test coming up on this Friday and Saturday. I will send out an announcement where we will go through all this stuff. And all I gotta say is study smart. It's a lot of information. And really getting down these different types of movements, the different bones, the joints involved, is going to help you a lot when we get into muscles, which is going to be what we're doing next week. Also, this is going to help you when we get to the circulatory system. So a lot of these things share names, and that's just going to be really useful for you later on. So getting the skeletal system down, getting these movements down, so it's going to help you, or should help you, should make the class easier later on, because all of this kind of builds on top of itself, starting with the skeletal system.